Password policy design sits at the intersection of human behavior and technical defense, which is why it is often contentious and frequently misunderstood. The goal is not to make passwords arbitrarily difficult, but to balance usability with resistance to common attack methods that target credentials at scale. A policy that is too weak invites guessing, reuse, and compromise, while a policy that is too rigid can push users toward unsafe workarounds that undermine its intent. Passwords remain widely used despite the growth of stronger authentication methods, so their management still matters in real environments. When designed thoughtfully, password policy becomes a risk reduction tool rather than a source of friction that users quietly work around. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the CISS books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. One of the most important observations from years of credential analysis is that password length generally increases resistance more effectively than overly strict complexity rules. Longer passwords expand the search space dramatically, making both online and offline guessing attacks more expensive for attackers. Length also aligns better with human memory, because people can remember longer phrases more easily than short strings filled with forced symbols. Complexity rules that require specific character classes can add some benefit, but their impact is often marginal compared to simply requiring additional length. When users are allowed to choose longer secrets, they are less likely to resort to predictable patterns that attackers can exploit. From a policy perspective, emphasizing length shifts the burden away from artificial constraints and toward meaningful entropy. Complexity requirements are often introduced to reduce predictability, but they can have unintended consequences when applied without regard for user behavior. Forcing users to include uppercase letters, numbers, and symbols can eliminate the weakest choices, but it also encourages predictable substitutions that attackers anticipate. Over time, users faced with frequent changes and strict rules may reuse the same base password with small variations, which reduces the real security benefit. This is especially problematic when policies require frequent rotation without evidence of compromise, because users respond by choosing patterns they can remember rather than truly new secrets. Complexity can still play a role, but it should complement length rather than replace it. Effective policy recognizes that humans adapt to rules, sometimes in ways that defeat the original objective. Password reuse across services is one of the most significant sources of exposure because a breach in one environment can cascade into many others. When users reuse the same password for work systems, personal accounts, and third-party services, attackers can leverage leaked credentials far beyond the original incident. Credential stuffing attacks rely almost entirely on this behavior, using known username and password pairs against multiple targets until they find a match. From the defender's perspective, reuse means that even strong storage and verification practices cannot fully protect accounts if the secret is compromised elsewhere. Reducing reuse is therefore as important as strengthening individual passwords. Any password policy that ignores reuse risk is incomplete, no matter how carefully it addresses complexity or rotation. Password managers address the reuse problem directly by generating and storing unique secrets for each service, reducing the cognitive burden on users. By allowing users to rely on a single protected vault rather than memory alone, password managers make it practical to use long, unique passwords everywhere. This changes the economics of password choice, because users no longer need to trade security for convenience. From an organizational standpoint, encouraging password manager use can significantly reduce credential reuse without requiring constant enforcement or training. Password managers also reduce exposure to phishing by autofilling credentials only on matching domains, which adds a subtle layer of protection. When supported appropriately, password managers transform password policy from an aspirational guideline into something users can realistically follow. Account lockout and throttling mechanisms are essential for reducing the speed of online guessing attacks, which rely on rapid, repeated attempts. Lockout policies can temporarily disable an account after a certain number of failed attempts, while throttling slows responses to successive failures, making large-scale guessing impractical. These controls must be tuned carefully to avoid creating denial-of-service conditions where attackers can intentionally lock out legitimate users. Throttling is often preferred because it degrades attack effectiveness without fully denying access. Monitoring lockout and throttling events also provides valuable signals about attempted abuse. Together, these mechanisms ensure that even weak passwords cannot be guessed quickly through online interfaces. Secure password storage is non-negotiable because breaches will eventually occur, and stored credentials must be protected at rest. Proper storage relies on salted hashing, where each password is combined with a unique random value before being processed by a hashing function designed for password protection. Salting prevents attackers from using pre-computed tables and ensures that identical passwords do not produce identical hashes. The hashing function itself must be intentionally slow to make offline guessing expensive, even with specialized hardware. Storing passwords in reversible or weakly protected forms turns any breach into an immediate compromise of all accounts. Strong storage practices do not prevent all harm, but they significantly reduce the value of stolen credential databases to attackers. Password reset processes deserve special scrutiny because they are often targeted as an easier path to account takeover than guessing the password itself. Reset flows frequently rely on email, phone numbers, or knowledge-based checks, all of which can be compromised or socially engineered. Attackers may exploit weak verification steps to trigger resets and redirect credentials to themselves. A secure reset process requires strong verification that matches the assurance level of the account being protected. It also requires careful logging and monitoring because reset abuse often appears as unusual patterns rather than outright failure. Treating reset flows as high-risk operations rather than convenience features is critical for maintaining overall credential security. Default passwords represent a known and persistent weakness because they are widely documented and routinely exploited. Devices, applications, and services often ship with default credentials to simplify initial setup, but leaving those defaults unchanged effectively hands attackers the keys. Automated scanning for default credentials is trivial, and attackers routinely exploit systems that were never hardened after deployment. Policies must require default passwords to be changed immediately and, where possible, prevent systems from operating until that change occurs. Eliminating default credentials removes an entire class of opportunistic attacks. This control is simple in concept but powerful in practice because it closes one of the most predictable entry points attackers rely on. Password history controls prevent immediate reuse of recently used secrets, which helps counter the tendency to cycle through small variations. Without history enforcement, users may change a password only to revert to the previous one at the next opportunity, especially when rotation is required frequently. History requirements force users to move forward rather than oscillate between familiar choices. The depth of history matters, because a shallow history can still be gamed by rotating through a small set of known passwords. History should be paired with sensible rotation policies so that it supports security rather than becoming a source of frustration. When used appropriately, password history helps ensure that changes represent meaningful improvement rather than cosmetic compliance. Breached password screening adds an important external perspective by blocking known compromised secrets at the time of creation or change. This approach checks candidate passwords against large datasets of previously exposed credentials, preventing users from choosing secrets that attackers already possess. Screening is effective because many users unknowingly reuse passwords that have appeared in past breaches, even when they believe the choice is unique. Blocking these choices raises the baseline security of the entire user population without requiring users to understand breach history themselves. Screening should be implemented in a privacy-conscious way that does not expose user passwords during the check. When integrated properly, breached password screening directly reduces the success rate of credential stuffing attacks. Administrative password controls require higher assurance because privileged accounts represent disproportionate risk. Administrators often have access to critical systems, configuration settings, and sensitive data, making their credentials high-value targets. Password policies for these accounts should be stricter, often requiring longer secrets, additional monitoring, and complementary authentication factors. Access to administrative passwords should also be restricted, audited, and rotated more aggressively than standard user credentials. Shared administrative passwords are especially risky and should be avoided or tightly controlled. Treating administrative credentials as ordinary passwords ignores their outsized impact on security outcomes. Monitoring is the final layer that ties policy and implementation together by detecting password spraying, credential stuffing, and unusual reset activity. Spraying attacks attempt a small number of common passwords across many accounts, while stuffing attacks reuse known credential pairs from breaches. Both patterns can evade simple lockout rules if not observed holistically. Monitoring looks for distributed failures, abnormal success patterns, and spikes in reset requests that indicate probing or abuse. Effective detection requires correlating events across accounts and time rather than focusing on single user behavior. When monitoring is strong, it provides early warning that policy controls are under pressure or that attackers are adapting. Password management ultimately relies on a combination of policy, secure storage, robust verification, and continuous monitoring, rather than on any single rule. Length, complexity, and history shape user choices, while storage and throttling protect secrets even when systems are attacked. Reset safeguards and breached password screening address common exploitation paths that bypass guessing entirely. Administrative controls recognize that not all accounts carry equal risk, and monitoring ensures that abuse patterns are detected before they scale. When these elements reinforce each other, passwords become a managed risk rather than an uncontrolled liability. In that integrated approach, password policy serves as a practical defense layer while organizations continue to adopt stronger authentication methods over time. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.